Since there's so much notoriety in the world today about the movie that Mel Gibson made about the crucifixion of Jesus, I thought that maybe today I would address the attitude of Chazal, of Judaism generally, to early Christianity, and to the events that happened. One of the major historical disputes which exists in the world concerns the identity of the Christian Savior. There are scholars who are of the opinion that he never existed. Judaism saw not him, but Judaism saw, we find in the Gemara. The Gemara, by the way, is the Talmud pretty much ignores the subject. Out of all of the thousands of pages in the Talmud, there are probably no more than 30 or 40 lines that concern themselves with Christianity in any form. And the rabbis prefer to ignore the matter because, after all, whether or not there was a resurrection and stuff like that, so you can't argue that point. Either it was or wasn't, and it's not an arguable subject. The rabbis generally shied away from religious debates, thinking that they were pretty much futile. So in the Talmud we find very little mentioned at all. In fact, in the Mishnah, which is the time, which is contemporary to early Christianity, we find nothing. And the Talmud, which already was developed at the time of early Christianity, after Constantine converted to Christianity and the Roman Empire became Christian. The Talmud, as I mentioned, has very, very few lines about Christianity and about the Christian Savior. However, the Talmud ascribes a man named Yeshu to a period of time of Rabbi Yoshua ben Prachia. Rabbi Yoshua ben Prachia lived approximately at the time of Hanukkah, which would be 165 years before the Common Era. So that Yeshu could not in any way be the Jesus of the New Testament, since he lived and died many years earlier. And the rabbis state that a teacher should never push away a student with both hands, but he should always try and hang on with one hand. If the student needs disciplining, then he should discipline him with the other hand. The rabbis gave examples of teachers who pushed away students with both hands, and because of that, later the students caused a great deal of harm, came to a bad end. And one of the examples is Rabbi Yoshua ben Prachia and Yeshu, that they were at an inn together, and Rabbi Yoshua ben Prachia and Yeshu were eating, and Yeshu made a comment about the waitress that was serving them, and Rabbi Yoshua ben Prachia felt that it was improper. The comment was improper, and that it should be told to him was certainly improper, and because of that he severed his relationship with him. And the Talmud is of the opinion that that's what made Yeshu a person that was against the Talmidei Chachamim and against the Prushim. Anyone who reads the New Testament will realize that the Pharisees are not the heroes of the story. And so the rabbi saw it, but that's Rabbi Yoshua ben Prachia that I mentioned, that's almost 2 centuries before the crucifixion, as alleged in the New Testament. This argument was advanced, by the way, in 1263 in the debate between Rabbeinu Moshe ben Nachman and the Jewish apostate Pablo Cristiani, who converted to Christianity and attempted to prove the truth of Christianity in a debate with the Ramban. And the Ramban already makes reference there. So there also the question of deicide was raised, that the Jews somehow killed, Jews were responsible for the killing of Jesus, and the Ramban there raises the problem of the dates, that according to Jewish tradition, the only Yeshu that we ever dealt with was almost 2 centuries earlier, and that therefore really there's no relevance to the entire discussion as far as Jews are concerned. However that may be, by the way, the 4 Gospels themselves don't agree as to the story. There's a different story in each of the Gospels. And part of the problem of the Gospels is that the earliest one was written in about the year 90. So therefore, none of the people involved are eyewitnesses to anything. And it developed. The Jews and the Christians, the Christians consider themselves Jews. They observe the mitzvot. Jesus quoted in the New Testament as saying that he did not come to change even one dot in the Torah. And for the first 50, 60 years of Christianity, it was a Jewish religion, but because of its belief in Jesus as the Messiah, not only as the Messiah, as being the Son of God, so there the rabbis took strong objection. One of the great theological red lines, so to speak, in Judaism is to ascribe to God any corporeal existence. And to say that God appears in the form of a man somehow, and that God, so to speak, allows himself to be killed somehow, and that body should be tortured, etc., is completely foreign to the Jewish idea of God. And this contention of Christianity alone was sufficient to drive the rabbis to state that Christianity was basically a denial of the Jewish tradition of God, the Jewish view of God. But more than that, we find, for instance, in the Chumash, and the Rishonim point this out, we find in the Chumash that Lot fathered 2 sons from his daughters in incest. After the destruction of Sodom, they escaped to caves in the desert of Judea, and they thought that the whole world was destroyed. And because the whole world was destroyed, then they thought that was the end of the human race. And since Lot was the only man around, so then the daughters conspired that their father, Lot, should have sexual relations with them so they could become pregnant from him and continue the human race. And they named their children after, one child was named Moab, from my father, and the other child was called Ben Ami, from my people. It was more subtle. And the Rishonim point out that they did not say the excuse that an angel impregnated them, which they could have said. Throughout human history, we have something called Machina ex Deus, something that's created by God. There was a famous story in Eastern Europe in the 17th century, 18th century really, in Poland, where a woman became pregnant, and it would have been a case of adultery and a case of being a mamzer, an illegitimate child, that she claimed that she was impregnated by an angel. And in 18th century Polish villages, that was not beyond the ken of imagination. And there was a dispute that lasted 100 years, 150 years, that nobody would marry anybody from that town because of the suspicion that maybe they're descended from that mamzer, that they're descended from that illegitimate child. And it became a cause célèbre amongst the rabbis in Poland. There are many tshuvas written on the matter. But the main point was that the rabbis said that no, angels don't do things like that, and that even devils don't do things like that, and that you can't ascribe conception to any other form except a male sperm and a female egg. And we see, for instance, Rashi in Chumash Bereishis, the end of Parshas Bereishis. So it says that the great people, etc., they saw the women that were around, and they wanted to have these women, and they took any woman that they wanted to. There were no niceties about it, and that from this union came the giants, the great people in the world. It's a very enigmatic story that appears there. So Rashi says that it were angels, and there's a legend that exists in Jewish sources and also in non-Jewish sources about fallen angels that got kicked out of heaven for bad behavior. So Rashi says it was angels. The other Meforshim really take Rashi to task for saying such a thing, because in essence that legend, so to speak, gives credence to the fact that somehow a woman could have a child not from a human being. And therefore the explanation that is used by all the Meforshim almost is that we're talking about the kings, the princes, the sheiks, the people in power. They were the ones that took whatever women they wanted, and it is from those unions that the strong people came, the leaders came, etc. But it has nothing to do with angels. But one of this basic idea, and one of the reasons that they really objected to what Rashi said, it was because of the fact that somehow in the struggle against Christianity, the struggle against the mindset of Christianity, there was no room to admit that somehow angels or anything to do with heaven would father human children. That was really a pagan idea. You had that amongst all the pagan gods. Zeus goes hunting for women, Apollo goes hunting for women, and Hercules claimed to have been born from such a union, that he's really the son of Zeus, etc. Those were all ideas that were current in the pagan world, that God somehow produced human children. And therefore this idea of Christianity was really repugnant to Judaism, completely so. Then we had the problem of how could God be killed? How could such a thing happen? If we grant, and we don't grant the original premise, but if we grant the premise, then what do we do with that? And in truth, Christianity has never really found a very convincing answer to that problem. So then it comes the second coming, he's coming again, be revived. He was revived from the tomb, but all of that still presupposes that he was killed. how does God get killed? What definition of God do you have that? And then the other major problem dealt with the idea of the Trinity. How, God is one, God is three, how does that work? So because of these problems, for instance, Maimonides, the Rambam declares that Christianity is in reality paganism. He doesn't see it as any form of monotheism whatsoever. However, the majority of the poskim saw Christianity as something called shituf. Shituf meaning God plus something. So Christianity is imperfect monotheism. It's a belief in one God plus something. And the Ramah, who is the posek for the Ashkenazim, held that shituf is permissible in the non-Jewish world. In other words, the problem in the non-Jewish world is only not to be a pagan. Once you lift it out of paganism, even though it remains imperfect monotheism, it is not considered avodah zarah anymore. The Rambam apparently is of the opinion that it has to reach the level of pure monotheism for it not to be avodah zarah. So the Rambam says, for instance, Islam is pure monotheism, because Muhammad never claimed to be anything more than a prophet. But that Christianity doesn't reach the level of pure monotheism, and therefore it's avodah zarah. Now that has great consequences. The Rambam lived in the Sephardic world, in a Muslim world, in an Arab world. So it really saying that Christianity was avodah zarah really didn't affect the society in which he lived. But those Jews who lived in the Christian world, if it would have been maintained that Christianity is avodah zarah, so then it would have been almost impossible for Jews to live in the Christian world, certainly to do business. And therefore we find Rabbeinu Tam and the Balei Tosfos right at the beginning of Maseches Avodah Zarah discussing the entire matter, a very long Tosfos on the first page in Avodah Zarah, and they create this idea of shituf, of imperfect monotheism, which is not avodah zarah, which therefore allows them to function in the Christian world, even though the Christian world is not recognized as being perfectly monotheistic. Now, the question, if according to Christian sources, Jesus is executed in about the year 35, there was no Sanhedrin in the year 35 any longer. The Sanhedrin disbanded decades before the Churban, before the destruction of the Second Temple occurred. So there was no Jewish Sanhedrin at all that existed at that time, and therefore there could be no Jewish Sanhedrin that condemned anyone to death, because the institution didn't exist. It didn't sit as a court, as a criminal court. Another point that is made is that we see throughout the Mishnah, throughout the Talmud, the opposition of the rabbis to the enforcement of the death penalty for anything. Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon said in the Mishnah that if they were on any Sanhedrin, nobody would ever be executed. And the Talmud says that if a Sanhedrin that once in 70 years, the Mishnah in Makkos, a Sanhedrin once in 70 years that executed someone was called that was a bloody century, a bloody Sanhedrin. And that's basically the idea that remains here today, for instance, in the state of Israel, that there is no death penalty, except for Nazi war crime. The only one that ever was executed was Eichmann. But there's no death penalty. That's a Jewish tradition. That no matter how heinous the crime, and that where we read in the Torah all of the times, most yumos, that the person should die, that is to establish for us the severity of the sin, and that's a sin worthy of death. But the conditions that the halacha imposes that would allow such a death sentence to be carried out are so difficult and unrealistic that as a practical matter it can never happen. So there was no Jewish Sanhedrin that existed at the time, and even if a Jewish Sanhedrin would have existed at the time, there's no history of giving the death penalty whatsoever for anyone. Now, crucifixion was the execution used by the Greeks and by the Romans. And it was a brutal and horrid method of killing someone. Sometimes it took days to die. It was an agonizing death, and it was again the spirit of the times. Let's put it that way. The generations. Josephus, in his history book, much of Josephus, by the way, was hampered with by the Christians. So almost all scholars agree today that all the references in the works of Josephus that concern themselves with Christianity were added, were not original with Josephus, but they were all put in later by the Christians to buttress their claims. But Josephus does say that in the time of Alexander Yanai, the Hashmonaim king, so there was a rebellion of the Prussian, section of the Prussian against Alexander Yanai. And there was a bloody civil war. And he records there, Josephus, that as a consequence of the civil war, Alexander Yanai had hundreds of Prussian crucified on the road to Jerusalem as a reminder to the people, so to speak, not to start up with them. So and there we're talking about 120 before the Common Era, and for the next 300 years crucifixion was today again we have different standards even for the death penalty. But in the Middle Ages, for instance, torturing a person to death was common. Being broken on the wheel or on the rack, and being cut into quarters and burned alive, and all of that was all regular. That wasn't out of the norm. And then the hanging was considered to be a step forward. Today, the states that still execute people, so they have lethal injection. Even the electric chair today is not considered to be as moral as lethal injection. Now, according to the halacha, there only were 4 types of execution allowed. Skila, which was being thrown from a cliff. Sreifa, which was molten lead was poured within the person. He was burned from the inside, not from the outside. Hereg was beheading, and chenek was garroting, strangulation. All of those forms had to be performed while the person was anesthetized, so that in reality the person did not feel pain, etc., from what was being done to him. That's the origin, by the way, of the Jewish toast, l'chaim. Why do we say l'chaim? We say, the market go up. And something else, right? Cubs should win. What's l'chaim? Because of the fact that the method of anesthetizing the victim was by mixing potions of drugs and alcohol in such strength that it knocked the guy out. So when we drink an alcoholic beverage, we say l'chaim, we're drinking it for life, not the way they drank alcoholic beverages when they put the guy to death. So the entire concept, therefore, brutality, of flogging a person unmercifully, is not allowed under Jewish jurisprudence. Even when a person was obligated to receive lashes, so the doctor estimated how much the person could take, and etc. It was done in a manner that was not meant to brutalize either the victim or the executioner. But all of this all of this was obviated by the fact that in the New Testament there's one line in one of the Gospels. But again, the four Gospels don't agree on any of the stories. So it's pick and choose. The story of the resurrection appears only in one of the Gospels. The story of Christmas, so to speak, appears also only in one of the Gospels, in a different one of the Gospels. And the story of the crucifixion varies from the Gospels. But the problem arose that one of the Gospels, the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, whom we now know exists because we found in Caesarea, we have found a pillar which mentions him as being the governor of Judea. So until we found that, we didn't even know anything about him. And so in one of the Gospels, he, so to speak, wavers at the moment of execution. And like he turns to the high priest and the heads of the Sanhedrin, and he says, like, it's your call, I'll do whatever you want. And they are the ones that say he should be killed, and they are the ones that say that that's the famous imagery of Pontius Pilate washing his hands. When we have that idiom in English, to wash your hands from the matter means that you're not responsible. It has nothing to do with you. So they say that his death is upon us and upon all our descendants till the end of time. That's the key verse there in the New Testament. Based on that verse, so then the charge of deicide was leveled against the Jews throughout all of the centuries. And that it made no difference that these Jews today are 1,000 years or 1,500 years or 300 years after the matter, because the Jews said it would be upon us and our descendants for all time. So therefore, everyone is guilty. In the Holocaust, there was a famous book written by Rabbi Weissmandel, of blessed memory. It was Northern Nitra in Czechoslovakia, Slovakia. And the Nazis set up a puppet government in Slovakia, and the premier, the prime minister, was a Roman Catholic priest by the name of Tiso, Monsignor Tiso. And the Nazis were going to they had rounded up 10,000 Jewish children to send them to extermination. Weissmandel somehow, with bribes and everything, got to see Tiso. And he told Tiso, he said, how can you condemn 10,000 innocent children to death when you have the power to delay it, to do something about it? And Tiso told him, there is no such thing as an innocent Jewish child. So that's good, old Christian theology in its practical form. Because if you accepted the curse upon yourself, so then you got it. And this charge of deicide rang throughout the ages. It was the source of many, many pogroms. Christmas and Easter were the worst times of the year in the Jewish world, especially Easter because it coincided with Good Friday and Passover, Pesach. So today Jews for Pesach wonder whether they should go on safari to Kenya or, in a hotel in Bali. That's our problem today. But there was a time when the problem was simply surviving Pesach, because you had the combination of the blood libel. The Jews somehow took the blood of Christian children to bake matzahs. That blood libel was so prevalent that we find in Shulchan Aruch that even though the mitzvah to drink the arba kosos is better performed with red wine than with white wine, but the Shulchan Aruch makes provision that if the blood libel is current, is present, that we should use white wine so that there should be no red stains on the tablecloth. So this concept of the blood libel, plus the concept of that the Jews killed them on Good Friday, and many times those dates coincided with Pesach, Good Friday and Easter, led to pogroms on a regular basis. After the Holocaust, church began to rethink itself. The Catholic Church today is still in somewhat of a turmoil regarding itself. Not only Jewish matters, all matters. The church is boxed into standards that are unenforceable in today's world. So during the reign of Pope Pius XII, who was the Pope from 1936 till about 20 years, which is a long time for a Pope. Most popes are elected, they're very old, and most of them don't have a long reign. This Pope has had the longest reign of anyone in, I think, 800 years or 900 years. He's been the Pope for 25 years, something like that. But after Pius died, and after the Holocaust and communism and everything, the church was in turmoil. So they wanted to elect the Pope, a fill-in, an interim person, until the College of Cardinals would decide which direction the church should go. So they picked a man by the name of Roncalli, who was an Italian bishop in Milan, and during the war had saved thousands of Jews from being shipped off to concentration camps. And this Roncalli became Pope John the 23rd. Now, he was an old man when he started. He was 78. Well, in my stage of life, 78 isn't old anymore. But but they thought he's going to, just keep the fire warm for a while. But he was a radical innovator. He turned the church on its head. And in his reign, he called the conclaves of Vatican I and Vatican II, which pretty much changed the church. He abolished Latin, so that the church now spoke in the vernacular and not in Latin. He changed the Mass. He relaxed many, many rules. If he would have lived and continued to live, we would see a far different church than the one today, because after him, he was a shtickl apokeris. So after him, the church made certain that the next popes would be very, very conservative people, as they are, as they have been. One of the things that he did was he eliminated, there was a prayer which called the Jews perfidious. In Latin it's the same word. It means untrustworthy, evil. He took that line out of the Catholic liturgy. he also removed the charge of deicide that the Jews killed Jesus. He removed that from the Catholic books, and he absolved the Jews of all of those problems. In so doing, I know that you're all sophisticated enough to understand what I'm going to say. Every religion has a Neturei Karta. And the church also has a Neturei Karta. So they said this Pope's an applicators. Cardinals are all, Zionists. And, forget that. And there's a section of the church, even till today, which has rejected all of the reforms of Vatican I and Vatican II, and remains the church of Constantine of the 4th century. Everything's in Latin. Nothing was ever taken out from the liturgy. It believes in all of this stuff, and it truly holds that the Pope is, at best misguided, but probably more than that, is an agent of. So John the 23rd, they said, was really a communist. This Pope, they say, is also working for the KGB. So when Russia collapsed, so now he's working for the CIA. You got to be working for somebody. And I want you to know that conspiracy theories are sell in the world. There's nothing that people like better than because something happens. How did such a thing happen? Oh, it must be, how did somebody shoot John Kennedy? So, right. So Lyndon Johnson.
No motive.
Lyndon Johnson put it together with the CIA. Castro with the CIA. Everything that's going on, it all is a conspiracy. And because it's all a conspiracy, so we got to get to the bottom of it. So here also, putting in John the 23rd was a conspiracy. Between the communists and the Jews, and they're the ones that put them in. So you have this section of the church that is, to a great extent, rabidly anti-Catholic, right? Because they say they're the true Catholics. Neturei Karta went to testify at The Hague against the fence. Like Arafat is going to spare them. Right? He's not going to blow up their bus. But, when you're a true believer, so you're a true believer. Doesn't make a difference. There's a wonderful little book by Eric Hoffer, the philosopher, longshoreman, who was an Oed Yisrael, a wonderful person. He died about 20 years ago. And he wrote a book called The True Believer. It's about 100 pages long, that's all. You get a hold of that book and read it. It's I found it to be greatly inspiring, because it reveals to you the mind of the fanatic, the mind of the person that he knows exactly what God wants. He has no doubt what God wants. So the Novi Yecheskel can say to God, Ahoa Hashem Elokim Ato Yodeya. I don't know, you know, right? The Yecheskel doesn't know, but these guys know. They know. So this faction of the church, Gibson 15 years ago, after having a very prolific life as a Hollywood star, and living the Hollywood lifestyle to the hilt, one day found religion, which is a dangerous thing. Because religion, like everything else, has to have balance and perspective and rationality to it. Billy Graham converted 10 million people, They get up and they holler, "I believe," right? And they're converted, right? So why isn't the world better after it's all over? What happens to these 10 million? Where are they? Becoming religious is an inner thing. You got to work at it. You got to work at it your whole life. You're always susceptible to falling off the cliff. No one has any contracts with God. So he found religion and he made this church, this original Catholic church in Malibu, Southern California. And he's a fanatical, so he makes this movie in which all the characters speak only Aramaic or Latin. English subtitles, the whole movie. So it's interesting, where do you get the people, where do you get the Aramaic from? So he wouldn't reveal his sources. But, I don't know. And the Romans, so the Jews speak Aramaic, and the Romans speak Latin. And the movie is 126 minutes long. It's 2 hours and 6 minutes of unmitigated horror. It's the goriest movie that's ever been made. And he makes it pretty clear, even though at the end he cut out that sentence, but he makes it pretty clear that the Jews are responsible. And all the Jews, or the Jewish leaders at least, he found actors that have stereotyped Jewish noses who look Jewish in the popular conception of what Jews look like. So all of this could pass, by the way, if the Jews would have shut up. Because this movie, 4.5 people would go see it. And that would be the end of it. There have been many, many movies before about the life of Jesus, all of which have bombed commercially. Because that's not the kind of movie that people go for. Unless somehow he is uttering obscenities in Aramaic, but otherwise. So the movie would have really have just, but the Jews made it popular. Jews have given him $100 million worth of free publicity. And so therefore everybody's going to go see the movie now. And then they'll have a vote afterwards. They even have the cards printed, is it anti-Semitic, is it not anti-Semitic, And so therefore it's undoubtedly going to do us much more harm than good. And it raises an entire issue which we have thought somehow had been laid to rest 30 or 40 years ago by the church itself. And the church has been very circumspect not to comment on the movie. But church groups all over America have subscribed to the movie because of the fact that they think that it will increase their attendance in churches and will somehow strengthen Christianity. So again, I read a review just this morning in one of the English newspapers from the internet that that many Christians feel that it's a turnoff because it's so violent and so horrid to watch that that they can never again think of Jesus or the New Testament or the Bible with a positive bent, because this is always going to flash in their minds. So, but he's got $25 million to blow on the movie, which he did, and I'm sure that he'll make the $25 million back. But he'll make it because there's a press conference today that the Simon Wiesenthal Center is having about it. So that's worth $5 million worth of ads in the newspapers. So we'll see what comes crawling out of the woodwork. It's not a good thing for us. Not a good thing at all. The whole thing is not a good thing. We could live without the whole thing. But publicizing it, in my opinion at least, really is playing into the hands of our detractors. Because it's like, have you stopped beating your wife lately, right? Whatever can you add? What answer do you have here? So, they're not going to give you a 45-minute lecture by Rabbi Wein on the screen to rebut it, right? What are you going to do? And the graphic power of images is not to be denied, right? It's in front of your eyes, right? And people say, well, it certainly happened because I saw it. There's a wonderful article by George Will in yesterday's papers in America that said that Jews really don't have to worry about the movie as much as they have to worry about the anti-Semitism of the left, of the intellectuals, of the professors, of the academics, of the colleges. That is what they have to worry about. And so you have here a lethal combination of things. Now, the Passion Play, there was a Passion Play in Germany that went on, still goes on, for 500 years, was always the source of anti-Semitism and pogroms. After the Holocaust, it was protested, and the German government stopped it for a number of years. But now it's back in business. So you have the old-fashioned anti-Semitism and the new-fashioned anti-Semitism. So the Jews kill Jesus, and the Jews kill the Arabs in Jenin, and then the Jews are killers. And that is the reinforcement that in the mind of the general public, which is extremely dangerous. But as far as we're concerned, as far as the facts are concerned, so then it may never have happened, and if it did happen, it had nothing to do with us. And Christianity has to fall or stand on its own merits, and not on what Jews did or did not do. And the attempt to strengthen Christianity by again, maligning Judaism is really almost a tactic of desperation, because at least as far as the Roman Catholic Church has lost tremendous ground in the 20th century. Its entire growth comes from South America and Asia. Its losses in the so-called First World have been enormous. Shortages of priests, nuns, etc. And the fact that you have majority of Roman Catholics that do not abide by any Catholic doctrine when it comes to items of birth control or all sorts of things. That the church is out of business there. And so the church has to strengthen itself, but if it does, it cannot do so at our expense, because that will lead it again nowhere. So we're part of the story. We'll see what will happen, but it is a throwback to the Middle Ages. Right? You want to know what our ancestors felt like in the Middle Ages? It's a little feeling, right? You're on trial at The Hague. You're, they're making movies about you, passion plays, conspiracy theories. Prime Minister of Malaysia says you're running the world. That's pretty familiar ground for us who've been there. We have to try to do the best that we can, and not to give in to all of this nonsense. But to say that it's going to be easy really would be to not tell the truth. Okay? Good.
What is the passion play? What is the passion play?
Passion play is a recreation of the crucifixion of the last. So that was the town Obermalden.